Welcome to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast, where we talk to computer scientists who immigrated from their home countries for study or for work or for other reasons. In these oral history interviews, you will find established and renowned computer scientists from across academia and industry narrating their experiences of immigrating from where they grew up to a completely different land, often the US. My name is Indy Gupta, and I'm your host. This is a remix episode. I spoke with 4 prominent computer scientists who had their feet in both academia and in industry. I asked them to compare their experiences between these 2 sectors. Some of you may be going through similar dilemmas. 3 of our 4 computer scientists spent significant time in one sector before moving to the other, either in academia, then to industry, or industry, then to academia. The 4th is an academic who believes graduate students should also be entrepreneurial. The 4 people I spoke with are Rico Malvar, former director of Microsoft Research Labs, then Dilma Da Silva, professor of computer science at Texas A&M University, then Rodrigo Fonseca, principal researcher at Microsoft, and finally Fadel Adib, professor at MIT. You can find the full interviews with these computer scientists in episodes 5 through episode 9 and also episode 11 of the podcast. First up is Rico Malvar, member of the National Academy of Engineering, a distinguished engineer at Microsoft, and former director of Microsoft Research Labs. Rico was previously also a professor in Brazil before he moved to the US and before he moved to Microsoft. After finishing his MSc from Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro in 1979, Rico immediately became a professor. Yes, this is before he did his PhD. This was common in Brazil back in those days. Here's Rico talking about it.
A fun thing was the very first class that I was supposed to teach when I was hired. It was March of 1979. I just started and I say, okay, Rico, you're going to teach basic electronics. You know electronics well, should be easy for you. I say, oh, of course. But a month before I started, a professor left, and that professor was scheduled to teach advanced digital sequential machine design, which was a final year digital, not analog circuit. And they said, "Ooh, Rico, we lost the professor to teach that, and you learned something along those lines because we saw you studied that at during our masters. Can you teach that?" And I said, "I'll do my best, but Funny thing, I get into the class, the first day of class, I realize I look at the roster, I look at the kids, and this is like final year, right? I was the youngest person in the room." So that was a kind of a funny way to start, but it worked out all right. So I learned with them and they were patient with me.
Then I asked Rico Malvar why he moved from Brazil academia in 1993 to industry in the US. You're transitioning from academia to industry, but also you're coming back to the US a second time.
Right.
Let's talk about the first one. So both of your parents were professors. And so what was your internal thinking in moving away from academia?
As I was mentioning, I feel like I'm always an engineer first and a researcher later, and I am a hacker and tinker. I just finished assembling my newest computer here, which, it's a Dell computer, but I open it up, put new parts and stuff like that. So I still like to to fiddle with things. And I always felt that it's a different kind of impact that you can have in industry. And I have felt if I stayed in academia, I could have more impact, driving more interesting research, graduating good kids and helping their education and all that. Those are all wonderful things, but I would miss on the opportunity to build things as real products. And I wanted to do that. So that's why I decided to make the switch, because I figure if this doesn't work, I'll switch back to academia and hopefully they'll take me back.
Next up is Dilma Da Silva, professor at Texas A&M in computer science, and she's also co-founder of Latinas in Computing. She also worked in IBM research for over 10 years, and before that was a professor in Brazil. And with Dilma Da Silva, I talked about first moving from Brazilian academia to a US research lab in 2000, and then moving from industry back to academia in 2014.
Yeah, so what happened is that a lot of talent was leaving. That is 99. They were leaving the research labs, all of them, in going and founding startups. So the research labs were actually looking at the applications coming through the internet. This is crazy. I tell, like, why did I do that? And after I did get an interview offer, then I talked to the many of people from my network that I knew they were in those companies in order to better prepare for the interview and also to understand what should I pay attention to. And, but I came back to the United States to IBM Research, thinking I was going to stay a couple of years and go back to Brazil. And, I thought I was going to really miss the teaching. And, interesting, I love teaching, but I did not miss the teaching. I think I was still so involved in, giving presentations. I become this go-to person that, if a senior VP, like, what is this Zen and KVM virtualization thing? Can someone give me a 15-minute presentation? And I really enjoyed doing those kinds. So I guess I was just teaching different people without having to grade anyone. So I didn't miss that. And the jobs were interesting. So I did release my position at the university so that they could hire someone else. And stayed longer.
Around the mid-2010s, you have spent something like a decade and a half in industry, and then you moved back to academia to become the head of the department at Texas A&M, the computer science and engineering department. Did you just grow tired of industry, or was it a new opportunity in academia that attracted you and made you make the move back?
Oh, I thought I would always at some point go back to academia because the mission resonates well with me. So I'm someone that at any given day, I did not know the value of the stock, Qualcomm or IBM at all. And I could see that my colleagues all knew. Okay. And of course, I want to do better for the company, but this, overwhelming goal to make it perform better on the market was not something driving me. Of course, we know technology helps people and things like that. But again, in terms of technology helps people, if that's what I want to do, yes, it's great to be on a place where you take it to market. But the considerations on taking to market are complex, as they should be. The company has a mandate to the board of directors and everything. It's not, companies have to go after protecting their assets. It's exactly doing the right thing. But for me, it was really hard to embrace that in the same way about getting this future proofing that we do when we work in academia, which is forming the next generation of researchers. Is not as much about the results we do today, although they matter, but it's also that you're training people.
The next voice is of Rodrigo Fonseca, principal researcher at Microsoft Research. He was formerly a professor at Brown University. He is originally from Brazil. Rodrigo was not sure when he got his PhD in 2008 whether he wanted to go into academia or industry. He went to academia first and then industry later. Here he talks about his decision point right after his PhD. So returning to your timeline, so you finished your PhD at Berkeley 2008, and then you spent a year at Yahoo Labs as a postdoc. It sounds like even back then you were considering industry as an option. The option of going to industry as a career never left your mind, it sounds like. Is that a correct thought, or did you already want to become a faculty member by the time you finished at Berkeley?
No, nothing's so easy, right? No, I again came to the same question when I finished Berkeley. I wasn't set that I wanted to become a faculty member. And I did apply to universities and to industry research and even to a couple of startups. And I got a couple of offers from each camp. I got an offer from Google back in 2008. I got, and in the end, I was torn between Brown and Meraki, and which later got acquired by Cisco. Meraki at the time had about 10 people. You always think back, right? When you like 5 years later, when Meraki was acquired by Cisco for over $1 billion. Let me put it this way. I was at an STI 1 year after Meraki had been acquired, and Meraki was one of the sponsors for the conference. And so there was this person from HR like trying to actively recruit people for Meraki, right? And then and she approached me, you should explore opportunities with Meraki. We're doing really interesting things. And now we have even more potential for growth. And then I told her, I already had an offer for Meraki once back in 2008. And she was like, oh. Okay.
Next, you'll hear MIT professor Fadel Adib. He grew up in Lebanon. He describes a surprising and rather heart-stopping experience of demoing his research project while he was a grad student at MIT to President Obama in the White House. Take a listen. You've had significant success with commercializing some of your research results. Nowadays, even grad students, as when they're in their PhD programs, sometimes they think of, should I open source this? Should I spend the extra amount of energy and effort and time on making this code, less research code and like more open source code? And then, of course, as faculty members, we already have a lot of very busy lives teaching and doing research, and then doing entrepreneurial activities is an even higher overhead on that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, how you managed the commercialization and entrepreneurialization of your technologies.
Yeah. So the one thing that I'm thinking about always is we're not publishing just for the sake of getting papers. In fact, we spend so much time building a system. Usually it could be anywhere between at least 6 months really on the short end, but most of the time it's at least a year. It's of the order of a year and a half, right? Building a system. Do you really want that thing that you built to be a paper that maybe someone's gonna pick up, maybe someone's gonna do something with it? Or do you want it to have a lot of impact? This year and a half that you spent on something, do you want it to try to have impact so it can change the world? Why did you do this in the first place? So for me, when I was doing my PhD, so first off, I had to build the thing to make it actually work, and people did not believe that it worked. So we had to build a demo and have people come over. And I was a bit entrepreneurial in nature, so I started thinking and telling my advisor, look, we need to start a company based on this. And she also believed in that as well. And so we spent a lot of time refining it and showing it to people, and every time improving it. And in fact, when I was doing my job interviews, I took my device to each of my 16 interviews, and every single time I tested it live. And so people could really falsify me. If you think this is not gonna work, you're gonna be able to see it there that it's not working. And for me, that was important. It was important to let people believe that it is actually working in this environment where there's so many other people, and I'm trying to sort of do this sensing.
Did it work every one of those 16 times?
It did actually. I mean, it worked in the White House when he demoed it to President Obama, so it should work after. We wouldn't have showed it back then. And that's yet another story, actually, that I'd be happy to share.
Please talk about that experience too. Yes.
So what happened is, the whole way in which we were invited to the White House is we were interested in commercializing the technology. We participated. MIT has this entrepreneurial competition. The first year we participated, we made it only to the semifinals. The second year we made it to the finals. And so we were picked up by this group that nominated us to go to the White House, and we had to do a demo. And we were not sure if we were going to do it to President Obama at the time. And so we take our device, we fly to DC, we set it up the day before in the hotel lobby, and sort of one of the people I was working with was like, oh, it feels like Mission Impossible, like you're setting up and then tomorrow we're going to the White House. Anyway, then we go in, and when you go to the White House, have to go through so many different layers of security, and the dogs really sniffed out the wires, like they pulled it apart. It's a research prototype. Yeah. So we go in, we set it up, it's not working. Of course it's not working, like the dogs really pulled it apart. And so we have about 3 hours before someone steps in, and it could be the president. And everybody starts, and I'm like, it works. I know it works. I've tested it and I know it works. So I keep sort of trying to debug it and trying all the knobs that I know how to debug. It's like, there's 2 hours left, it's not working. There's 1 hour left, it's not working. There's like 30 minutes left, it's not working. And about 10 minutes before people start walking in is when it starts working. And I tested it a few times. It's just a bunch of loose connections at the time that I really need to find where all of these are. So it's like research. You just have to do it in 3 hours. And then it worked well. And he was actually quite surprised that it worked, that well. Where I was actually the subject of the demo, and I showed that this wireless device that is in there could monitor my breathing and heart rate without touching my body. And so I was not very concerned. I mean, I knew if it didn't work, I would know how to make it work without having to change anything in it. So whenever I had an interview, I would go in the morning, I would test it out in that setup. I would just make sure that it is working, and then I would leave it there. And to be honest, even if it doesn't work that well, people know it's a research prototype that you're trying to demo in real life. And that's what I tell my students now. So we now invest every single project that we're thinking about. A lot of our projects are moonshot ideas. But eventually we want it to have impact. So we try a crazy idea. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, we try to pivot quickly, but then we build on it. So we write the paper, but then we're building the demo. We also create a video about it because we're building these physical things. And so we usually also create videos about it that can help us talk about it. And then this building good work allows us to build on top of it. One of the hardest things in research is, do you build something and are you able to build yet another system on top of it? And if you build a really robust system, then you are able to build on top of it. And sometimes we open source our code. Like, for example, a lot of our code on Ocean IoT, we are open sourcing all of that because there's so much scientific value in it. And we don't just open source the code, we also open source the schematics. We also write step-by-step tutorials because people need to know. I mean, this is interdisciplinary work. People are coming from different backgrounds to try to build it. If we want our work to have impact and go beyond just a paper, how do you do that? The way is you need to really push it all the way, wherever that is. I mean, sometimes it could be through deployment. Maybe not every paper is gonna do that, but we strive to do that with every paper because really that's what maximizes the impact. And sometimes people might think that, what matters is the number of papers, or what matters is the number of citations. The number of citations might be a good metric. The number of papers is never a good metric. If someone has, 80 papers versus 100 papers or 20 papers, what I care about is in what way have these people changed the world. That's what matters.
Yeah, that's very beautifully put. And an almost heart-stopping experience in the White House, but it seemed like it worked out in the end. I guess my takeaways from that experience were, be prepared. If you're doing a live demo of any kind, be prepared well ahead of time. But then also kind of know your system in depth so that you're confident that if something goes wrong, you have a plan B and a plan C.
Absolutely.
We finish today's show by listening to a comparison of the work cultures between industry in the US East Coast and industry in the US West Coast. Dilma Da Silva worked in IBM research near New York and then Qualcomm in Silicon Valley before she became a professor at Texas A&M. She's up next. East Coast versus West Coast. Dilma Da Silva moved from IBM research near New York City, East Coast, to Qualcomm in the West Coast in the early 2010s. Here she talks about comparing the East Coast and the West Coast work cultures and her famous Starbucks test.
For me, when I went to Starbucks to do reviewing papers at Starbucks, everyone who came to talk to me, they thought I was a venture capitalist because I'm older, and they would try to tell me, they have a solution even for the way that I had my computer and my iPad together when I was working. And I preferred when I was in New York City, and the person who talked to me at Starbucks was often a writer, but often also a nurse, a teacher. So I love us computing, but the concentration in Silicon Valley was too high for me. So I said, I should move geographically. And that's when I decided to look at the academic positions.
Very interesting that Starbucks is an interesting litmus test of what the social circle is there.
Right. So that's also a consequence of living in small apartments. So notice here, I don't go to Starbucks to review my papers. I can vary by staying in very different parts of my house. But in New York, I lived in a very small apartment. And Mountain View, I lived in a very small apartment. So it was, okay, I have to spend 6 hours reviewing papers. I'm going to Starbucks.
And here's Rico Malvar, who moved from Pitchertel in the US East Coast to Microsoft in 1997. He compares the two coasts.
Here at Microsoft, many years ago, but to this day, you can go to a meeting where you're discussing, for example, technologies where you want a patent or license or something, and there will be some lawyers in the meeting. And some of those lawyers will be in shorts and very collared shirts. Typically, if you are in the same meeting in the East Coast, they're all in suits. But other than that, not much really. There is that, that thing, okay, who has the best schools? Is Stanford the best school in engineering, or is it MIT? Or they're all very good. I don't think you can tell one from the other. They have the similar intensity. They have the similar let's drive opportunities for startups and things like that. I found very similar things in the community here in the West Coast versus the East Coast. It's more the culture and the societies. People here in the West Coast seem to be a little more relaxed and laid back than in the East Coast. Unless you go down in the East, if you go to the Southeast like Miami, then it flips. In fact, you go to Miami, you're going to bounce on many, many Brazilians, because Brazilians love to go to Miami.
If you haven't already done so, please listen to the previous segments in the show. We covered Yugoslavia in episodes 1 through 4, Brazil in episodes 5 through 8, the Middle East in episodes 9 through 12, US Virgin Islands in episode 13, and China in episode 14, and several anonymous narrators featured in episode 15. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes from the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast as we visit other parts of the world. All the music used in episodes of the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast is royalty-free. All voice recordings were performed with and are reproduced with full consent of narrators and participants. You can find music credits on our website. Join the online discussion about this podcast on all major social media, including Twitter and Facebook, with the handle CSImmigrant and hashtag CSImmigrant. And of course, the episode guide is available at our website, csimmigrant.org. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists Podcast.